Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Air, presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly. Today, we're joined by Jalen T. Jackson, a visual artist whose paintings explore African American culture, collective memory, and experiences. His paintings depict flashbacks of his childhood and other memories, especially growing up as a son of a single mother. Jackson began a college as a business management student at North Carolina A&T University. During his junior year, he signed up for a painting class and rediscovered his love for art that he has fostered as an African American child growing up in Durham, North Carolina. He received his BFA in visual arts from NC A&T State University in 2021 and is exhibited locally at 311 Art Gallery, Anchor Light Studios, Wake Tech, Barton College, the Fruit and Art Space, and he was the inaugural HBCU Artist in Residence at Art Space in downtown Raleigh. Jalen's work is included in the group exhibition Chop Shop We Are Here, currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center through October 26th of this year. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jalen T. Jackson to today's open air conversation.
Hey Dexter, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. It's an honor to be in conversation with you today. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. This is the first time we're meeting, and so I have a lot of questions for you that are, quite natural because we haven't had a prior conversation. So why don't we just kick it off with you telling us a little bit about yourself the way you normally would? Obviously, I read your bio, but bios can get outdated. So tell me a little bit
Okay.
about Jalen T. Jackson in your own words.
Yeah, so I'm painter and artist, doing the best I can to express myself through art. Uh, Oil painting has been the best thing that I could use to express myself through art. And I started out at A&T as a business management student. Took my first art class at A&T and fell in love with it. I actually went to an art supply store before I knew what type of paint I wanted to use. Like, did I want to use acrylic or did I want to use oil paint? And I walked to the painting aisle and asked the first person that I saw, which one's harder to use, acrylic or oil paint? And she said oil paint, so I chose oil paint. Um, so ever since then, I've been developing or cultivating an acute relationship with oil paint. It's been intense and for many different reasons. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And so, this journey that you've been on as an artist, obviously, it hasn't been a journey that you've been on your own. Are there any mentors or individuals, perhaps other artists, that have been sort of, at your side through this journey?
So many. Hopefully, if I start listening, I don't even want to leave anybody out. But I'll say my professor Barnhill, who was the first professor I had in the art department, his class really changed a lot for me. Um, like really, almost like the whole staff at A&T that was there when I was there really played a huge role in mentoring me, especially my former professor Roy Carter, who was also co-curator of the We Are Here Chop Shop exhibition at the Gantt. He Man, it was like, you can really sense love from a professor when they actually like really care about you and your trajectory. Um, I always tell the story about how I was taking his anatomy class and we had like an assignment to draw Martin Luther King. And everybody had their drawings up for critique, and he's looking at me like, you know you need to do better. Like, he had some choice words for me, and this was in front of the whole class, but it was like I had a choice of either being mad about it and like, form like kind of being resentful about it, or I could like look at it from a different perspective of, this guy really cares about what I'm doing with my life. This guy really cares about where I'm going with this art career. And ever since then, like, I've had such an immense amount of respect for him. That was really a transformative period of my journey. Um, After I graduated, I met an artist named Alia El Barmani. She gave me a studio inside of her studio, and I studied under her for at least a year, taking her classes, bending her ear about a bunch of different questions. And she was so kind to answer any kind of question I had, and I was able to develop my skills even more, hone my skills even more under her. Um, so many more people. Darlene McClinton. Man, it's a lot. I could. I don't want to leave
Yeah, yeah,
anybody.
yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot where it's not like this award show and you gotta to figure out everyone that you that you want to thank. I'm sure
Right.
there's too many to list. So what's interesting, you mentioned this anatomy class, and so the subject for the anatomy class is Martin Luther King Jr., which is interesting to me because I would not have guessed that that would have been the subject for the anatomy class, which kind of leads me to a couple of other questions, and that is one, what's what was your experience like, you know, being an HBCU student, um, and has that sort of like found its way into your work?
For sure, it's for sure found its way into my work. Being an HBCU student, um, it definitely changed my life. When I graduated from high school, Riverside High School in Durham, North Carolina, and honestly, I didn't want to go to college. But my mom, she's an educator. My mom's very intelligent, and she's like, it doesn't matter what you want to do, you going to college. You know what I'm saying? So I had to go to college, and I chose A&T. Um, well, I'm gonna say the full name, the North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University. I got to put respect on the name. But while I was there, I met one of my friends, Darius, and he hosted this men's talk, right? So it was in a big auditorium on campus. And to kind of cut the story short, one of the questions came up, can a woman raise a man? And someone raised their hand and said no. Someone else raised their hand and like had a rebuttal for that. And it caused like a little bit of tension in the auditorium. But I left the auditorium feeling a little perplexed because I felt like the person who said no, a woman can't raise a man, was being very dismissive about my life and didn't even know it. And I didn't even know really how to feel about it at the time. It wasn't until I was at Alia's studio and I was trying to figure out what to paint about. I ended up meeting somebody on the basketball court, trying to find people who I could paint just to kind of, practice and hone my skills and practice mixing skin tones and stuff like that. Um, and I invited a guy to the studio to do a portrait, and he went on a whole like it was random. It was a random tangent about women not being able to raise men, and I had a flashback straight back to A&T in that auditorium, and I was like, okay, now that I've developed these skills, I can actually use these skills and utilize them to speak about this topic because obviously this is. I think the statements are coming from a standpoint of a little bit of ignorance. Um, Especially because people don't know what happens behind closed doors, especially if I'm coming from that situation. People don't know my situation. So it's my job to, as an artist, to be able to speak about it and do it through my paintings. So that's how I developed my first series, which I called the Mama's Boy series. And it's a few different paintings that I've created just to speak about my experience growing up, the son of a single mother for the majority of my childhood, teenage years. Um, so yeah, that moment at A&T had a huge impact on my practice today for sure.
Wow, wow, yeah, a lot to unpack there. It's interesting because I think that that kind of conversation or that kind of question about whether or not a woman can raise a man, um, obviously any culture, any group could ask such a question, but it comes with a lot of complexity when you're asking that question in the context of the African American experience. and a lot of the baggage that people carry kind of comes through in their answer to that question. It's I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I do understand how like such a question can have a profound impact on how one thinks about oneself, and how that can find its way into your work. So, in terms of like other subject matter that you've been engaging with, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you choose who and what to paint now?
So now I've actually been focusing a lot on self portraits. Um, I feel like at this point in my life, I am asking myself, what does accountability look like, and how can I put that in my work? And that causes a lot of self reflecting, a lot of excavation, trying to dig out the parts of me that I may not be sure about or may want to explore. So self portraiture has definitely played a huge role in what I've been doing currently, um, and also just meeting people at places that I frequent, whether it's outside near the studio or anywhere that I go to often. Just that, and just asking people, or maybe a friend or someone who I see often, would you be interested in, being in a portrait? And usually they say yes, and I go from there. Um, but yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with discernment too. Like if I see someone and I'm like, man, it'd be nice to really paint to paint that person. Like I'm going to ask, because if I don't, it's going to bug me. I'd be like, why? I'll be thinking about it hours later. Like, why didn't I ask that person if I could paint them? So that's where I am with it.
Sure, sure. Are you based in Charlotte, Raleigh, or Durham?
So I live in Durham, but my studio is in Raleigh currently until August, and I'll be in Chapel Hill.
And talk to me about the city you live in and how that affects your work. I mean, most of the people who will see this now or in the future um, probably will have not spent time in North Carolina, let alone Raleigh, Durham area.
Yeah, Durham has definitely had an impact on it as far as like just because I've been here so long and cultivated relationships with people from Durham as well. But I will say, even though I was born in Durham, I moved to Salisbury, North Carolina. When I was when I was 2 years old, and lived there until 9. So I'll say like those formative years in Salisbury really had an impact on like the beginning stages of my artistry, and I didn't even know it. Um, I could share a story if you're interested in like
Sure, sure,
how that.
please.
So so I'm outside playing. I could probably be like maybe 7 years old. Seven between 7 and 9. I'm outside playing with kids in the neighborhood, and one kid asked me, "Are you in this gang or are you in that gang?" And I was like, I was confused about it. And my mom being the great mom that she is, she always like warned me about situations like that. So I didn't really know how to answer. I don't remember what my response was. What I do remember is going in the house, grabbing a piece of paper, two different colored markers, and a cup. And I used the cup to draw a circle, or draw two circles on a piece of paper. And in the middle of it, I put verses, right? I was so proud of it. I was so proud of it that I taped it to my bedroom door. When my mom saw it, she flipped out. She's like, "What is this? Why are you doing? Why are you drawing stuff like this?" And I think at that moment, in hindsight, she was being such a great mother because, I don't know how many people would, I don't know how people would take it, when they see their kid drawing stuff like that and what would happen. And I think that's the only time she's ever been, she's ever criticized my work like that ever since. But I think the most important part about that story is no one told me to go in the house and draw about it. That was a visceral feeling that I had, something innate that told me, go process this on a piece of paper. and use these different materials to express how you're feeling because you don't really know how to articulate it. Just draw about it. Nobody told me to do that. I just did it. I didn't know that I was being an artist at that moment, around 7, 9 years old. So I think that was the most formative part about my childhood when it comes to my artistry and what I do today.
Yeah, that's a great story and interesting like outcome. Did you I know you were very young, so you probably don't recall, but did you ever have any other interactions with that same kid?
Oh yeah. It's maybe too many interactions to speak about on here. Um like it's a little inside joke with my aunt that something happened with that kid. I think he had like maybe disrespected my aunt and I took it from there. Just but but we were really good friends and we rode bikes together around the neighborhood. We played video games together, so it was like a really good friendship until I left Salisbury and came back to Durham.
Right, right. Well, I'm sure there's so many layers to that. But it's interesting how your mom reacted to that situation. I'm quite sure he's been a like was guiding force, guiding light, throughout your creative journey. Let's talk a little bit more about your creative process. I mean, when you were a kid, you had this interaction, and that kind of inspired you to go and grab these cups and draw what you did. But these days, talk me through like how you go from a concept to a completed work. I mean, briefly, like what's that like for you?
So it could be a thought, it could be something I'm pondering about, it could be a dream that inspires it, it could be a painting. I go from there to figuring out almost kind of like how a director directs a movie and they're trying to cast people. So I could think of an idea and also think about, okay, who would I want to portray this in a painting or something like that. And I think about it and I ask somebody, if I see somebody, I ask them, do a photo shoot, and I work from the pictures. So, and also imagination as well. I have to add that in there.
Yeah, sure, sure. And tell me about what you're working on these days. I mean, obviously you have the work that's in the exhibition at the Harvey B Center, but you've also been doing some other projects, some of which I listed in your bio. But what are some of the other things that you're working on right now?
So right now, like the self portraits I'm working on, I'm actually really interested in photography right now. So I've been doing a lot of photo shoots um, of like portraits of people, portraits of myself, portraits of not just portraits, but kind of like when I feel very conscious, something really catches my attention, I'll take a photograph of it, and I might add that to a painting. So it can be so random. It's just random things right now, and I'm conceptualizing it, trying to bring it all together just to create a narrative, but also making sure that I'm being original and staying authentic and true to my voice. So that's what I've been working on recently.
Um, I don't think I said this in your bio, but how old are you?
I'll be 28 next month.
So, your life has sort of like overlapped with a very, very tumultuous time in American history. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear what your sort of feelings are about what's going on in the world and how that's finding its way into your work. I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about super specific events, political or otherwise, but obviously being 28 years old, your entire adult life has kind of like played itself out through some wilder US elections, a pandemic, and some other really wild global things. So, as an artist,
Yeah.
like how are you processing all of this?
It's a little tough. It's a little tough because there's so many different emotions that are tied into it. Like politically, um, I try to find ways to make sense of it, and it can easily turn into a little bit of irritation with what's been going on. Um, I'll say like for the most part, when it comes to the DEI situations or banning books, um, I take that situation very seriously because it's just like before where they're trying to take away our education, and I have very strong feelings towards that. So when it comes to like books, sometimes I'll put a book in my painting. Like it's a book and it's a few different books in the work that's at the Gantt right now. And I do that just to kind of like express how if they're trying to erase our history, then I have to do something to make sure that it still stays. So that's kind of where I am with it, and like especially like politically, that's where I am with it. It's a lot of different emotions though.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I dig it. Tell me about some of the influences, like in terms of artists or other creative people who you look at and you go, wow, that person really gets it and has had a profound impact on how you approach your creative life.
I'll say the first artist that really inspired me was Barkley Hendricks. Barkley
Mm,
Hendricks had a huge impact on what I wanted to do in the very beginning. Still does. He's such a pioneer. He was such a pioneer. But it was like looking at his work for the first time. I did a project on him while I was at A&T. Looking at his work for the first time, it was like, this is what I want to do. I finally found someone who who gets it, right? Who paints skin tones like I want to paint skin tones, paints people like I want to paint people. Um, so that was like I'll say that was the first artist. I wish I would have had a chance to meet him, um, but yeah, it's few different artists like especially in the very beginning before I really knew more about their life. I'll say like um, Salvador Dali when it comes to surrealism.
hmm
Uh, yeah, those are a couple.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's good to sort of have this like broad view on influences. I mean, I think that we can pull things from so many different sources. You know, this conversation has me thinking about something that I often come back to because I think, like one, you mentioned the importance of education, which is something that I feel incredibly strongly about as well. What you may not know, like, because why would you, is that I have a son who is 22, who just graduated from HBCU about 2 months ago.
Okay.
Um, he graduated from Howard, and and so the question I asked you about your HBCU experience was also kind of like a selfish one because I want to kind of hear like what your what your thoughts and experience has been. I mean, in the end he had a fantastic experience. I think in the beginning it was difficult, and a lot of that has to do with things that were sort of outside of any of our controls. It had to do with timing. He just happened to enter college right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you know what that was like. I mean, that's just like
Yeah.
wild first couple of years. But in the end, I think it was a wonderful experience. And the other thing I was thinking about is your age, right? 28's it's a sort of a magical age, and I'll tell you why. I mean, so many creative people really the late 20s is a time of deep reflection. And it's a time where, especially if you've been at it for a long time, where I think you start asking yourself a lot of questions about the future and whether or not the work you're making matters, and whether or not, if if you're a commercial artist, whether you can make a living off of it, whether anyone cares. There's all these kinds of things, and we can see, like, unfortunately, a lot of deeply creative souls didn't even make it out of their 20s because of all of this sort of like conflict and turmoil, right? It's a very important time. The other thing is that and this goes back to MLK, which is why I thought it was like good and ironic or coincidental that that was the person you mentioned when you talked about your anatomy class, because when I think about Martin Luther King, sure, I think about the things that a lot of people would think about, because that's how like the framework of how I was taught about him when I was in school, right? Through the lens of the civil rights movement. But I also think about the fact that when Martin Luther King was doing the things that he will be ever, known for forever, all of that activity, all that political activity. Um, Martin Luther King was in his late 20s, going into his mid 30s.
Mhm.
But he wasn't, unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, King, when he was assassinated, he was only around 38, 39 years old. So it's not like he was this man who lived to be 60, 70, and was kind of like doing all of this stuff with the benefit of 40, 50 years of like experience behind him. He
Yeah.
was doing all of this stuff. He decided to do all of this. And again, there are many, many other freedom fighters, many, many other people we can talk to. Martin Luther King, obviously, for important reasons, gets a lot of the recognition. I will certainly acknowledge that there are many, many other men and women who made what he did possible. But my point is, he was only around 30 years old out there doing this.
Yeah.
you know? And so when people are like in their late 20s and they are trying to figure out if what they're doing matters, I often bring them back to the fact that so many of the people that we think about historically important were also in their late 20s when they were doing all of that work.
Yeah.
You are in that place right now. So your artwork and any other work that you're doing within your community is incredibly important now.
Yeah.
Like now, not just like into the future. Like this is the moment. This is the moment to do good work.
Yeah. Sure.
You
For
know,
sure. You
um,
mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Even if you don't feel like you're getting the recognition that you feel you deserve, that's common.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about how this age is an important age, and a lot of times like we go through turmoil at this age trying to figure out if the work that we're creating matters, right? And you could see that in my work at the Gantt as well. Like you can you can see it because it's so contemporary. What I'm doing is I'm taking my experiences that that I've gone through and putting them in the work, and it's up to date, right? So it's like if it's turmoil that I'm experiencing, like I'm trying to find tranquility, I'm trying to find peace of mind. What does that look like, and what does it look like when I'm dealing with that turmoil? You can see it in the work. I'm definitely putting it in there. I'm putting all of that emotion in there, and it brings me joy when people can see it. When people walk up to my piece and they say, "Man, I was feeling like this yesterday."
Wow.
Like that means a lot to me. Or I feel like this. One man walked up to one of my self portraits that's at the Gantt, the Middlesex portrait, which is Middlesex number 2, and he said, "Man, I feel like this at work every day." And it's one of the most intense portraits that I've ever painted. And to hear him say that and relate to it like that, like I cannot deny that my work um, doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? It definitely matters. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's that's all the confirmation I needed, really. And I get more confirmation, especially for myself, because I had to validate myself, instead of, searching for other voices. I have to be able to listen to my own voice and be I'm my biggest critic, but also I have to be able to realize that I can do this and I know I can do this. And all I have to do is put in the work, apply myself. Something's going to come from it. All I have to do is work. And that's all it takes. Like
Sure.
like they say, talent doesn't really mean much. It's the work. It's what you do with the talent, right?
Mm,
So my work is always going to beat my talent probably, and I've done a lot to nurture my talent, a lot. But what matters is if I have a long day or if I'm tired, I'm still going to go to the studio because that's what it takes.
yeah,
That's what it takes.
yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of your work, I know we have some images. I'd love to go through some of them and talk about some of the technical aspects of the work that you do, and also talk a little bit more about the work that's currently on view at the Gantt Center, and maybe even talk about that show a bit more. So while the team loads up, okay, great. So we have an image now. So what I'd love for you to do with each of these images, insofar as you can talk about the title and dimensions and all those things, but I'm actually more interested in what's behind the work.
Like the thought process and the concept and
Sure,
everything behind the work.
sure,
Sure.
yeah.
So obviously it's called it's the Middlesex triptych, and this is the first one, Middlesex one. Uh, so this was about a situation in Middlesex, North Carolina. I was working out there one day, and I came in contact with a few white guys, few white people. It was actually two simultaneous situations, but I'll just speak about one of them. Um, I was being followed in a van in this neighborhood. I'm already feeling uncomfortable because I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I haven't been to Middlesex. I don't know what's in Middlesex, but I'm out there and I'm working. This guy stops me and he's like, "You're going too fast in this neighborhood," and I'm working, so it's like we go back and forth, and I see the guy that was following his van. He stops his van, gets out, and now I'm like, something is about to go down. So in order for me to leave the situation, I just pressed the gas, got out of there. And as I'm leaving, they start beating on my truck, yelling racial slurs. So obviously, when you hear stupid N word, stupid nigger, when you hear it, it makes you want to do something about it, right? It makes you want to get out the truck or get out the car, whatever you're in. That's what I was feeling at the time. But also, I know something about history and where that could lead, right? I'm by myself out here, outnumbered, you know, doesn't do nothing but add more fuel to the fire. So I had no choice but to just keep it moving, right? But just because I keep it moving doesn't mean that those feelings go away. So in order for me to figure out the healthiest way to deal with it, I had to paint about it. So with this piece and the whole triptych, you really get a lot of emotion and you get that deep red, but not only is it red, it's um, very opaque. The impasto technique is what I'm using 'cause to lay the layers in for that red. And I'm not trying to be representative of anything. Obviously, like it's part of my body, but I'm not trying to draw or not trying to paint anatomy. Painting feeling. So I'm just laying it in because I felt like I had to lay all my emotions out on the work at that time, right? I always lay all of most of my emotions out on the whatever I'm working on, but this particular piece is about anger and frustration. When it comes to the boxing headgear, that's a symbol, right? So that symbol, what it symbolizes, I'm trying to draw this parallel between sports injuries and also mental injuries, right? So
Mm,
let's take um, for example, when we get a concussion playing football, right? And it can lead to CTE. Well, we don't know that it's CTE until people do an autopsy. So you go your whole life without really knowing if you have it or not. But that's because of sport. That's from getting hit, and that does something to your mental state. So when I think about that, I also think about what we endure as African Americans here in this country and all the tyranny that we have to, go through and endure, what that does to our mental state, right? And our emotions. So I feel like with the boxing headgear, I'm symbolizing the fact that every time I walk outside the house, I have to be able to protect my mind, protect my mental state in
Hmm.
order to really deal with everything that I'm going through in life, especially when it comes to races or casteism or anything like that, because I've experienced it. So that's where I'm getting with this piece, and also like even in the headgear, you see like kind of these scratches, right? And that's
Hmm.
just it's an urge to just scratch out paint, um, just to let that emotion out.
Fantastic work. Fantastic work. Yeah, this is such a strong painting, and I really that detail in the nose and mouth areas like really excellent, man. Um, let's look at the next word.
So this piece, Middlesex 2, this is the piece I was referring to earlier when the guy came up to me and told me this is how he feels at work all the time, right? Um, Same type of concept, same type of techniques, but this one I really wanted to show that anger that I had built up during that situation, right? So the triptych is numbered 1 to 3, and it's also um, different sets of emotions in each painting. That first one we just came from, that was just the fact that I had that acquaintance and I just had to deal with it, right? So it's kind of like blank face, like really pondering and thinking about what am I about to do? What am I about to do about this, about the situation, right? The second one is how I'm like seriously feeling about what I want to do about this situation. What, the mistake that I might make during this situation, and how I really can't express myself how I want to because of the consequences that I know I may run into. So you see the expression, and that's exactly how I'm feeling.
Well, it's wonderful that you're able to use painting as a way to channel these frustrations, and I'm sure you've thought about the fact that there's so many people who don't have that outlet, that creative outlet, and it just eats away at them. I mean, I'm not the first one to say it, but racism is a disease that just like it warps the mind. And I think that people who believe in these like deeply racist ideals, eh, not only are they dangerous and lost, but they're looking for like in the case of the altercation or the incident that you described. They're like looking for a reason to validate their own racism. It's a
Yeah,
very, very bizarre state of mind. I won't go so far as to say I feel sorry for racists because I think that they deserve something other than my sorrow. But but let's move on to the next image.
yeah, like you said just now, like that false sense of superiority, right? Um, they always want to make us feel like we're inferior for whatever reason, right? Um, after that, after that second part of this triptych, this third one came about because it's like even though you're calling me a stupid nigger, I know I'm not one, right? And you don't know me as well, so it's like this expression is a disbelief. Like I don't believe you. I know who I am. You don't know me, right? So that's what I was expressing with this portrait. It's like me having to leave that situation knowing who I am. I have to know who I am, right? In order to not do something that I'll regret later on. Like this is the healthiest thing that I could do.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the thing about it is, and again, I want to focus on your paintings, not really go too far out into, like other things, but it's making me think about other things. If not you, then someone else, meaning like that situation you described, you just happen to be in your car at that time on that road, but it could have been some other black person in their car at that time on that road, right? Like it's just, that was going to happen because those people wanted to make that happen if they could find someone to encounter in that way, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I try to do. think about ignorant people like that is that they always have existed. They probably will always exist. You really, sometimes the universe brings you into interaction with them, or coincidence brings you into interaction with them. But the fact is, it's like their cross to bear, and you were smart to just keep it moving and find a way to channel all of that frustration and anger into something that created these beautiful paintings. Let's go to the next image. Quite different.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So with this piece, cessation before metanoia, it's an amalgamation of ideas throughout this painting. It can be anything. Like you choose anything in this painting, and I'll be able to just talk about why I chose to do it or chose to paint it. But also, I'll be remiss if I didn't uh, explain how the process came about with creating this painting. It's actually a collaboration between uh, my mom, my grandma, and me. Right. So my grandmother's a pastor, and I was a little apprehensive about creating this piece for a few different reasons. But talking to her and speaking to her about religion, um, kind of made it make more sense for me a little bit.
Mm,
Uh, like we stayed up until like 4 o'clock in the morning, just talking about religion, talking about this piece. When it comes to my mom and her role in creating this piece, I talked to her about what I was about to do with this piece and how I was describing it to her. And I mentioned books, right? And I told her I was going to put the Bible in there. And she said, whatever you do, whatever books you put in there, make sure the Bible, like it's nothing on top of the Bible. Make sure it's nothing on top of the Bible. And that's like a Christian principle, right? Um, so without her saying that, I don't know if I would have, how I would have stacked those books or where I would have placed the books. But I had to make sure that that Bible was on top and nothing was above it. So that's the role they played in it. But it's so many different ideas in this piece.
well, unpack one or two. I don't want to, be presumptuous. I would love to understand, just like briefly encapsulate, like what's happening in this. What is the core idea of this painting?
So this piece depicts a nightmare I had one night. So I had
Mm,
this crazy nightmare one night. It's gonna like it does sound crazy, but I had this bird's eye view, and I'm looking down, and I see people being eaten alive by creatures. Um,
mm,
and it really disturbed me. It had me thinking like, what? Why would I have a nightmare like that? Where is that coming from? And partially, it could be anxiety, could be my fears, could be anything like that along those lines. So one of the first things I did was I just started looking up different paintings, like horror paintings, right? And I came across the Nightmare. Henry Fuseli, I believe, is the artist, and that composition inspired this painting. I still wanted to make it true to me and authentic to me, so obviously, like the design of the composition has been changed up to make sure I'm still being original. But I wanted to put these creatures in here for different reasons, such as like, are the creatures a self portrait of me, or are those creatures something that I'm dealing with outside of myself, like an external force outside of myself? It could go both ways. Um, like I was speaking about earlier, when it comes to accountability, what does accountability look like, right?
mm,
So when I saw that piece, The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli, there's a woman laying in a bed and she looks like she could either be dead or paralyzed or something. And you can't really see her eyes. But in this piece, I wanted to choose to show sleep paralysis, right? And I don't know, have you experienced sleep paralysis, Dexter?
yeah, I know. I have experienced it. I know people who've experienced it. Yes,
So
Yeah.
so you know how scary it can be, right? And I kind of wanted to portray that in this painting. But the interesting thing about it is I didn't want to, as I'm reaching my arm out, I didn't want people to know what I'm reaching for. But my hands and my fingers are in the direction of things, of a few different things I could be reaching for. The books, I was meticulous about the books because Cass was one of the books that I was reading right before this painting was started, and it really had an impact on how I think about our history and what's going on today. And Viola Davis finding me was such a great choice for the books I put in this painting because she talks about her life coming up, her dealing with racism, how she
Mm,
became a phenomenal actress today. Also, you see the Uncle Nearest liquor bottle
hmm.
down like on the bottom of the table, and that's another history symbol for what I'm talking about. And it's like we all have I feel like I'm pretty sure a majority of us have vices, right? And it could either be religion, it could be you want to get more information about our history, or you could just be trying to find yourself and go through this self exploration journey. Or you could choose a vice that isn't so healthy. That's why the bottle is there. But I'm reaching over there, and you don't really know what I'm reaching for because I don't even know what I'm reaching for. But until I choose, right? And a lot of people ask me cessation before metanoia, what does it mean? A lot of people ask me what does it mean, and cessation is that period of stoppage. Like it could be a temporary period of stoppage, or it could be the end of something. And metanoia is the Greek word for repentance. It means to change one's mind. That was the second title of this piece. The first title was "If I Die Before I Wake," which is how I would start my prayers. Um, but I didn't want to talk about death in this piece, or I didn't want to put it in a title because that's power in the tongue, right? And I didn't really want to manifest something that I didn't feel comfortable with. Um, so me changing the title to Cessation Before Metanoia, for me, it meant that if I want to take accountability and if I want to change my mind about something, first I have to stop, think in order to change my mind. But if I don't ever stop to think, I'm just going to continuously do the thing that I shouldn't be doing, or that I could change up later on in life if I'm able to take accountability for it.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. So much depth, and I'd love to see this painting in person at some time in the future. I think we have two more images left. I'm not sure if it's one or two, but let's advance to the next. I'm sure it's certainly. Um, so yeah, in the interest of time, maybe we can briefly talk about the final two images, and I have a few more questions I'd love to ask you.
Sure, sure. So to briefly describe this is these are one of the paintings of the series, the Mama's Boy series that I was referring to earlier. Um, you were asking me how do I choose my models, right? These two beautiful people are my cousins. And the funny thing about it is during the process, I walked in, I told them, act like I'm not here, just be natural. Nobody told my little cousin to pick up the Hulk action figure. Nobody told my cousin to pick up the Spider-Man mask, right? They were being natural. This is what they do in the quotidian, right? So I feel like this piece speaks volumes because this is what happens behind closed doors. So when people say a woman can't raise a man, in this piece, I see a woman doing a great job, you know, being a role model or being a hero, which is the reason why I named it Real Heroes. Because he's looking up to her like I look up to my mom as my hero. So that's what I'm referring to with this piece, and also even with the composition, you get this triangle element in the composition, which refers
Mm,
back to, that Baroque period, Renaissance period for painting. I still take those elements and apply them to contemporary art with what I do, but I'm still putting my own symbolism in it to be true to my voice, like I talked about earlier, and what I want to talk about in my work, and how I want to pick the people that I love and the people that look like me.
wow, amazing, amazing. Um, Have you have you been able to travel a bit outside of the U.S., or is that something you're
That
aspiring
is
to do?
that is a very That's a very interesting question because I just told myself I think I want to go out of the country for my birthday. And I have an idea about where I want to go. I'm thinking about Italy, but it'll be my first time if I choose to go. My first time out of the country.
Well, I mean, there's so many great places that could be one's first destination. In fact, I mean, at your age, it doesn't even matter what your first place is because you're going to probably travel a lot throughout your life. So, if Italy's the first place, then any place else can be the second place. But the
Right.
reason I ask that is that I always feel that the only way to really understand a painting is to stand in front of it in real life.
Hmm.
And for me, um, whether it's your work or any other artist's work that I'm seeing on a screen, I always feel this like sense that I'm only seeing like 10-20% of the painting.
Yeah, for sure. Pictures don't do it justice.
Yeah, yeah, and that's for better or for worse, right? Some work looks better on screen than it does in person. Some work looks better in person than it does on screen. That's just the way of the world. But the reason I ask you about travel is that I think that there are some paintings out there in the world that whether it's and I'm not just talking about European painters, whether they're Italian or British or whatever, but just globally. I think there's some paintings out there in the world that when you stand in front of them will just light a fire in you. And I'd be very curious to see what kind of work you're doing after like several years of travel. It's going to be tremendous. I can tell you that it's going to be tremendous because you're already doing great work. And so when you stand in front of other great paintings that you've only seen them in books, so you've only seen them online, it's gonna like melt your brain.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, I mean, obviously the great museums where you live, of course. But I'm just talking about some of those paintings that you have to travel to see, right? We know what they are. Like there's some paintings out there in the world that they're not coming to you.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
let's get to the last image.
So this is another cousin. The title is God's Plan for Sean, and this is my little brother right here. Even though he's my cousin, he's my little brother. Uh, we played like we bonded over basketball during our childhood, and he's a professional basketball player now, playing overseas, and super proud of him. Right, so I told myself like I'm just sitting there thinking I'm like I gotta paint my cousin. Um, Especially because of how I feel about it, how proud I am of what he's accomplished. So I wanted to depict him, being in his element, like got the basketball there, and also like the gloves again. It's like that boxing reference, right? We basically have to fight for what we believe in, fight for a place in life where we want to be, and it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication, and that's what he does. He puts in the work, and it's gotten him to where he is now, which is a great place in life. So that's what I wanted to depict in this painting.
That's fantastic. So that was our last image. So we can end the slideshow, and I have a couple more questions I'd love to ask you before we conclude today. So you mentioned photography quite a lot earlier on in our conversation. So I'm curious to know, was photography something that you picked up because you felt like it would help you in your painting practice? So is photography sort of like a separate thing that you're interested in as an artist?
It was the former. So photography for me was something I had to teach myself in order to stay original with my work. I'm not the type of person that likes to go on Google and search for images to paint. Um, in the very beginning, I was doing that, but going to my first gallery in Raleigh, uh, I'm looking at the work and it's like it's not the type of work that I make. These are like people I've never seen before. So obviously these people are either taking photos of these people or they're painting them from life. And I do both. I paint from life as well whenever I have the time to. And when it comes to pictures, I just love the process of doing a photo shoot, being able to talk to people, communicate with people, spending time. building relationships with people during the photo sessions, and uh, it was definitely something I had to teach myself. I've never taken a class on photography. YouTube University was my core was my institution that I learned from, um, and also taught myself like Adobe Lightroom to edit the photos or Photoshop, like stuff that I'm self taught with stuff like that. But like we talked about how education is really important. I'm about to start my master's program at UNC Chapel Hill starting next month, and photography is something I'm interested in exploring even deeper while I'm there. So I'm looking forward to that.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I was wondering, in terms of like your education trajectory, like what your plans were. So you already answered that. So my kind of my final question, I suppose, or maybe almost final question. Although you're only 28, and I'm sure that you feel like you've learned a lot, but there's a lot more to learn. There's definitely some 21-year-olds out there that are aspiring artists that are trying to figure out like how to make it work, how to, within their own community and beyond. Is there like one lesson that you've learned as an artist in the past, let's say 4 or 5 years, career lesson, in terms of like getting shows or building relationships or things along those lines? Like, is there like any like gem you could drop on us?
Yeah, we get in our head a lot. A lot of times we're possessed by our own mind. We're holding ourselves back most of the time. If we feel like we get in that type of rut. So that's one thing is to uh, practice breathing. That's important. Um, I'm a big advocate for therapy. I've been in therapy for a while, and that's helped me tremendously with my process as an artist and my journey. Um, and I'll say like the next biggest one is be careful with idolizing people and who you idolize. That could have a huge impact on the way you see things because sometimes uh, we may hear different opinions sometimes that takes too much of a toll on our own mind and kind of suppresses our own thoughts and how we feel about certain things. And if we try not to idolize people and put their opinion above ours, then it helps us find our voices. So that would be another thing that I've learned along this journey so far.
Well, that's wonderful. You've obviously learned a lot. Well, I want to congratulate you on the success you've had so far, and really am looking forward to seeing this next chapter in your artistic journey. What happens post your masters, and also how your upcoming travel, not just this trip, but over the course of the next 5, 10 years, will shape you and shape your work. I've enjoyed our conversation thoroughly. So I'm about to say the final words for today, but I want to give you an opportunity. If there's any, 30 seconds, anything you want to share, so it's not an abrupt ending.
Oh, I've enjoyed this conversation as well, Dexter. It was a huge honor and pleasure to be speaking with you, and um, it's great to have this opportunity, and I'm super thankful. It's crazy even being in this situation right now because, like, when I was at Auntie, I didn't see it coming. So, it's great. It's a great feeling. So, thank you. And I appreciate the game as well
Thank
and the
you.
chop
Thank
shop.
you. Of course. Of course. Of course. Well, thank you so much, Jalen. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt to expand its reach and to further develop programs like today's Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by visiting ganttcenter.org/donate. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future programs and other video content updates. I want to thank you for joining us for today's conversation. We look forward to next month's Open Air with Miguel Torres on August 12th. I want to wish everyone a safe and wonderful evening. Till next time.